Welcome back to another edition of Crash Coursing, an original series dedicated to sharing the stories of industry leaders in the areas of digital trends in sports. Today, I have with me Ryan Greene, who's the current director of social media at Top Break Boxing. Prior to this, he was the director of strategy for the MGM Resorts. Ryan, what's up, my man? How you doing?
How we doing? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me, man. How's quarantine going for you so far? It looks like you have a nice little cabinet of pleasantries behind you.
Yeah, this is my home office that is basically at the end of my kitchen. So yeah. It's funny though. I work from home normally, so that part of this hasn't really been all that new to me. But obviously, it's been different with having not had a live event to work in a few months, and no traveling or being at our office in Vegas. But overall, and I'm sure we'll dive into it, but it's been a challenge, but it's been a fun challenge for myself and our whole team over the last couple months. And on a personal level, everything's been fine. The only difference is I haven't been able to get a haircut in about 3 months, but I'm surviving.
Yours looks good, man. You're going your out.
Not as sharp as yours, but I'm hanging.
Yeah. So Ryan, I usually like to start at the beginning. So why don't we learn more about the Ryan Greene before he became the Ryan Greene of director of content, and you got all this an amazing accomplishment there at Top Rank of what you do there. But everything has a beginning, and so I'd like to know more about your childhood. Actually, where did you grow up, and what got you into sport? What was that first inkling that you knew that this is something you wanted to do?
Well, I grew up in the north suburbs of Chicago, primarily in the late '80s, early '90s. So, as a kid growing up in that area, obviously we had very relevant subject right now, the '90s Chicago Bulls, and every kid was obsessed with them. And my dad took me to games at the Chicago Stadium and then the United Center, and growing up a giant Cubs fan, Bears fan. I knew from an early age I was obsessed with sports. I loved playing them. I loved being around it. And I knew I wanted to work in it in some capacity. Yeah. In college, I went to the University of Kansas, and my big involvement in sports there was I got involved with I went there to go to journalism school, and I got involved with the student newspaper, the University Daily Kansan. And I just kind of walked in the door and tried to find out how I could get involved late in my freshman year. And I ended up working at the school newspaper for 3.5 years, dabbled in some TV and radio while there. Nice. And, I became, you kind of find your passions at different points. Yeah. I found mine in college in journalism and working in newspapers. And it's did you
ever do like the school radio?
Yes, I did. And, I veered towards TV or towards newspapers at the end, which, in hindsight, I don't regret it at all, but it was a little unfortunate with the timing because as I was kind of coming out of college is when the newspaper industry was kind of starting to tail and struggle. And I worked in newspapers and as a sports writer and journalist, both in the Kansas City area and then in Las Vegas. For about 8 years before transitioning myself to work full-time in marketing and PR on that side. And just kind of, again, happened to find my path, and that led me to social media and digital content. And I worked both in and out of sports for a couple of years, but ultimately my goal was always to be in sports. And that's primarily where I've been for about the last 5-6 years in a couple different capacities.
Yes. So you found yourself in boxing, but before boxing, there was football, wasn't it? You oversaw both the traditional and digital communications for the Las Vegas Lights Football Club, which was a 2018 expansion side in the United Soccer League. Could you tell me a little bit about not just your experience working in that capacity, but what types of skills did you start learning about yourself during that time there?
Well, it's funny because so prior to that, I worked in boxing, which boxing's always been a passion of mine since I was a kid. But then transitioning into soccer, it was more about an opportunity as opposed to a passion. I wanted an opportunity to be part of a sports brand and build it from the ground up and really help establish a brand's presence, a brand's voice, a brand's characteristics. And, I worked with them for their expansion season in 2018, and it was a phenomenal experience in a lot of ways. I learned a lot of what to do and what not to do, but more than anything, I learned that passions can also be molded.
Sure.
I went into that project. I'll be totally honest. And I told them this when I interviewed for the job. I was not a huge soccer fan. I knew very little about soccer, but I enjoyed the challenge of diving in and learning about it. And how do I apply what I know how to do on the professional side to a totally new subject matter? And as a professional, I definitely grew in that year, before ultimately about a year after that, finding myself back in boxing.
You know what? That resonates with me so much, man, because so for me, I've been a filmmaker at the core for about 15 years now. I was really deep and heavy into TV and film, short form content, short form cinema, advertising. And it was only a little bit of passion for sports that I had. I didn't think I'd dive into it this deep ever. I mean, my circle of friends consisted of people who knew more about NBA, NFL, and athletes in general than I did. But for some reason, I was still attached to the sport as much as they were. And I think me and you can share something very similar here, where exactly what you said about passion is, as long as you can find yourself passionate about a story, I mean, the opportunities start becoming a lot more vivid and a lot more clear. Okay, this is the path that I want to take. Was that something similar for you in terms of like how you decided to finally transition once again back into boxing? Was your passion for boxing always there?
Yeah, it was always there. And, after I worked in boxing the first time, I kind of wondered if I would have the opportunity to work in boxing again. I knew that down the road at some point I might want to. This opportunity just ended up being perfect and coming at the right time, kind of when it was least expected for me.
Yeah.
And, being back in it now for about a year, I've been back with Top Rank for a year at the end of June.
Yeah.
And I've kind of had some epiphanies along the way that, I kind of feel back in my zone. And I don't like using the word comfort zone, because I'm not one who believes that you should just get stuck in a comfort zone, because I think you stop developing as a professional. But I'm back in something I really feel passionate about. And it's more fun to push yourself and challenge yourself in new ways when you're doing it in a space where that passion is there.
Let's talk about social media. I mean, it's so cliche to say it took the world by storm, but it really did. Proud of social media, everybody was pretty much in the same food group, which is TV, radio, print, and then the early days of internet banner ads. We later found out that these four mediums weren't working as efficiently as they used to on our generation, for example, and the generation before ours, where content wasn't available as much simply. And now all of a sudden we have this device in our hands where we're getting over 1 billion channels through our phones zapped at us every morning we wake up. How important is it for you as a director of social media to understand how much noise there is in content, and how important it is for you to break through the noise?
You can't do social media now the same way you did social media in 2016.
You can't do social media now the same way you did social media last week.
Exactly. So it's amazing how much your strategies change. And that's why I find it such a fascinating just industry to be in, because, there really is no resting on your laurels. You just constantly have to be thinking forward. And, that I'll tell you what, being practiced in that has really especially helped in these last 2 months or so, where, we've been regularly connecting not only our brand, but our athletes with our audience that is normally a very engaged audience, and trying to keep that level of engagement up when we don't have the support of live events every 2 weeks. When you have the support of games every day or events every 2 weeks, I'm not going to say it's a cheat code, but it makes your strategy so much easier to unfold. But when you get into no man's land and you don't know when your next event is going to be, you've got to really push the envelope to start thinking of new ways to keep your audience engaged.
Me and you share a mutual friend by the name of Blake Lawrence, co-founder of Opendorse. Shout out to Blake Lawrence. Everybody go check him out. He's actually paving the path for athletes to build their own brand outside of their leagues or their teams, and in this case in boxing, our promotional agencies. How important do you think it is? And this is something that I'm sure you're familiar with what I do. How important is it for athletes, especially in boxing, to understand the importance of their own social media, and that they can't just rely on their promotional agencies all the time to build that brand for them. Although obviously the promotion agencies are doing sufficient amount in terms of fight week and fight night, and this is something I'm very loud about as well. And I like your opinion on this as well. I just don't think that promotion companies are doing enough for the fighters. And is that something that fighters should be looking at doing on their own, or is it something that you guys are training your fighters on? How do you look at that aspect of the game?
So when I first worked in boxing, a lot of what I did for the first real half of that time was specifically athlete focused, training athletes on kind of the right way to build their brands in the social space, before kind of developing into a more overarching brand-based view.
Yes.
It's a line that I try to walk now because, our brand, Top Rank Boxing, is known as the leading promotional brand in the United States in the sport. Yeah. And there's a responsibility to carry when presenting that brand story every day to boxing fans and the public. But everybody also knows that a promotional company's most valuable assets will always be its athletes. Yes. And supporting those athletes in any way possible is a first and foremost thing for me as a responsibility. When I came in last year, one of the things that I really focused on was starting to make relationships with our fighters and get them comfortable to knowing that, we want to help you. And we want to support you with relevant content that you can use on your end that's going to help build your brand. Because at the end, Blake will tell you this all day, and it's what he does. An athlete's biggest advocate is always going to be themselves. Yep. So, obviously I'm not at a position where I can be, for example, running their social media channels for them every day, for 90 plus athletes, but we can help them out with, as we develop, from a fight night, delivering them highlights, delivering them photos from their fights, delivering them content in the build up to a fight. Yes, of course. And educating them along the way that using this is to your advantage.
Who are some of Top Rank's current social media kings?
I love pointing out how good Terence Crawford is when he's so calculated in the way when he decides to engage with someone on Twitter who's talking mess to him, the way he can engage, like he doesn't talk a lot, but when he does, it's impactful and it's really well driven and he's so sharp with it.
Yeah, I agree. Terence is very well calculated. And what do you make of the content that he posts when he really does?
I think he's just so authentic and organic to who he is. And, you don't have to be out there and faking to be someone who you're not to be effective on social media. Yeah. And he is really the perfect example of that. And, a guy who he mentors, Shakur Stevenson, I think is very much in that same mold. And then, you have guys who also just lend themselves to being social media superstars by the way they perform. Like Teofimo Lopez is a great example of that from, our younger stable of guys. And, we have lots of guys behind him who really just get it in that sense in how to engage their audience.
Joseph Adorno.
Joseph Adorno, especially with what he's been able to do on TikTok already. Really impressive. Xander Zayas, the way he, he's only 17, 18 years old, and the way he connects with fans on Twitter already, especially his Puerto Rican fan base.
Yeah, and he doesn't have much followers either, but when he tweets, he gets love, that kid.
And it's Tyson Fury. He's a guy who really leans into his story. Everybody knows the story of his struggle, and he's really kind of built an army of support behind him because of how open he is about his struggles in the past and his comeback. And he's someone who just people can just connect with because everyone can relate to that story with something they've struggled with and have had to fight to come back from. So you see guys do it at kind of different levels and in different ways. And that's the beautiful thing about athletes and social media. There's no one right way to build an effective brand. There's so many different ways to do it. And it's really fun to work with a stable of athletes who have each succeeded in doing it in different ways.
Speaking of Tyson Fury, sorry, as you were talking, I'm rolling up. I was pulling up the social media article that Break Media and Opendorse put together. I'm not sure if you ever got a chance to look at that. Did you look at those social media stats?
I remember that, yeah.
I just want to remind the audiences as to how phenomenal Tyson Fury was during that fight build-up. In terms of, so in terms of even posts that drove the most engagement, Twitter, Wilder got about 19,500 engagements. Fury had 12,000. So in terms of engagements, that's the only part where Wilder pretty much was a step ahead. But when it came to actual content comparison, Fury was way ahead of the game, man. This guy took home he had a total of 800. So edit this in. Tyson Fury had a total of 827,800 new followers and grew his fan base almost 20% during the buildup of Fury versus Wilder too. And that once again just adds to your point about storytelling and him able to share his personal life with the world in that sense. And I feel like boxers aren't doing that enough. I don't feel like boxers, it's not that they're incapable. I just feel like they're not understanding or being educated on how important this side to the boxing game really is. I mean, I'm sure you should have knockout power. Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury should have knockout power. Teofimo Lopez should have amazing ringmanship. Jose Adorno should have a heavy left hand. But equally as important to that is what you're doing outside of the ring. And I want your opinion on that.
Yeah, and, you know, I thought that the Tyson Fury-Deontay Wilder rematch, you know, the proof is in the pudding with the numbers that you showed. And I thought from our perspective, it was really a really good example of how both an athlete and their promotional company can work together in building not just results in terms of, you know, a successful pay-per-view event, but also building both brands simultaneously. You know, we on the Top Rank side invested a lot, both in terms of manpower and financially, into developing content and unique content around that fight. And at the same time, Tyson was being very authentic and engaged with his audience, and then also implementing some of the content that we were serving him. You know, for example, we developed a series at Top Rank last year called Top Rank Real Time that we use for some of our tentpole events, where it's very much throughout fight week, behind the scenes looks at, you know, the stories behind the fight week and up close and behind the scenes views that people wouldn't get normally. Nice. And it's a really nice supplementary piece. And there was some really cool stuff to come out of the Fury Wilder event, not just, you know, fight week, but in the 6 weeks leading up to it, you know, from his training camp, from when he went to Arizona to do a promotional shoot with ESPN and appear at the Fiesta Bowl. And it all comes together when you have an athlete who engages like he does. And when we're giving him content and his team content, saying, you know, we really think this is going to be, you know, good for Tyson to push, that they work with you. You know, we have several athletes who how
much of it, just going back to our article, how much of that content was created in-house versus how much was just Tyson being Tyson Fury?
I'd have to go back and look. I know he was creating a lot on his end, which, to be honest, is always going to be peak on social channels for, you know, for athletes, is, you know, really taking the reins on, you know, what of yourself you want out there. And it can be at the end of the day, it can turn into a really nice mix where you can have this super authentic, organic content that guys are clearly, you know, capturing themselves. And then you mix it in with this really high level, well-produced, really clean, impactful produced content that they are supplied, you know, from, you know, for in this example, from his promotional company who's putting muscle behind him. Right. Because you know, what you brought up with the organic content that guys are creating themselves, if you think about it, that's how fans connect most with an athlete. When they see Tyson Fury, you know, for example, right now during quarantine, while he's, you know, recording video of doing these workouts in his living room with his wife, that's something that me around the globe, I can connect with that, because he's doing the same things in his living room every day that
even
I'm doing
him
every day.
Swearing at his kid is fine, guys.
Yes, it's seriously, it's a great look at and
a human side of him.
And I think athletes kind of need a little bit of both. I think they need their own authentic content that they're putting out there. And look, I understand some guys just don't want to put a lot of their private life out there, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But then you supplement that with, really good, clean, professional looking content. I think it just creates an all-encompassing, really impactful channel for athletes that just really keeps their fans engaged.
Good, impactful, and clean, professional-looking content. I love how you put that together, because it was only up until recent where I found that boxing finally got their shit straight, right? And this is in terms of content, because it's always been just the Showtime and the HBO and the All Access and the 24/7 and this deep, dark history behind the fighters. And yes, we grew up watching that. We loved that. Muhammad Ali, the Great, to Floyd Mayweather on All Access, man. I loved every bit of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're getting to the point now where it's almost becoming primitive content, because it's the same story almost, where the guy grew up, had a hard life, and he's on his way to become a world champion. And I just feel like these stories of hardship are no longer resonated with today's generation, simply because of the way that they're growing up compared to how we grew up. And I'm finding that there's only a few people in boxing, and I can proudly say you're one of them, who kind of get that, understand that it's time to tell new stories.
I just liked, and this is where I really take my former career into my current career, in that, as a journalist, I was a storyteller. And I love approaching our athletes as a storyteller and seeing what it is from, what they have going on in their lives right now, what it is in their past that really makes their story compelling, something that'll connect with the audience, and something different. And look, not everybody's going to have a different story. That just is what it is. But there's something within every athlete that can connect with people out there. And I just really enjoy that challenge when getting to work with our athletes, and when athletes see that you really do want to present the best version of them and help them present the best version of themselves. It can create a really good working relationship and a personal relationship. And that's something I've always just really valued with the athletes who've been willing to work together with us.
Awesome. Ryan, tell me about the content strategy part to all this, man. Like, you're obviously a genius of your own, in your own respect. You've executed and created some of the greatest social media campaigns with Top Rank. What are some of your goals moving forward into 2021, you could say, when sports finally do start making their way back?
Yeah, I think coming into Top Rank, there was such a great foundation already in place from the way that digital and social had been done before. It was really cool to come into a situation where we did not have to reinvent the wheel. The big thing for me on the strategy side was finding the pillars with our content that's going to keep our engagement strong and also continue to hook in new fans. And Top Rank is in a very unique position, because as far as promoters go in the US, Top Rank's been around longer than any one of the, the major promoters in the sport. So you have not only these next generation talents who really engage with a different audience on social, like such as a Shakur Stevenson, a Teofimo Lopez, and guys like that. You also have this rich history. So, one of boxing's biggest struggles on the content front has been finding, and this is for several years, is finding a way to connect with a younger audience. And your younger audience lives on social media. But, your older audience does too. And, it's really about finding the right balance. So with Top Rank, we have, like I mentioned, these next generation talents and these current stars, but with this rich history, we can kind of meld it all together. So, our content pillars are we have several content pillars internally, but, we like to show the side of our current athletes that's going to really connect with that younger audience that's living on Instagram, that's living, on their phones, while also really connecting with our fans by showing the rich history of Top Rank, really utilizing our library of fights that dates back 40, 50 years.
I'm loving that content already that you guys are running currently against ESPN. You guys are showing some of the greatest heavyweight fights now, some of the most controversial fights, and you're even kind of selectively choosing out like round by round actions kind of stuff with each fighter. And I think that's important in terms of how you can engage. And this is something I've said very openly, even before ESPN decided to throw out the heavyweight showdown. I said, look, man, if you guys want to start connecting with the audiences around home, go back to how it resonated with us, because there's no person on this earth who's not going to resonate with the Muhammad Ali fight. You know what I mean? And so for us, it's very important to understand where the demographic is right now and what atmosphere they actually live in. Nobody's in front of their TVs anymore. Right now they are, because we're all captive. But once this storm kind of blows over, we're back on our phones. And I think it's just so important to be in front of that 14-year-old kid from Alabama who might not have heard of a Shakur Stevenson and have him collaborate with one of his favorite vloggers from his area. You know?
And I very much am always a glass half full type of person, and especially professionally. And, you know, the ability that, first of all, I got to point out, ESPN is a fantastic partner to work with, both on the content side, on the digital side, everywhere. Yeah. And working with them on programming some of these, you know, marathons that we've had during the last couple months of the pandemic, you know, we're reaching an audience with these old fights that may not have even ever known that they existed. You know, showing some fights of, you know, everybody now knows the Money Mayweather persona of Floyd, right? But, you know, Top Rank promoted Floyd Mayweather when he was Pretty Boy Floyd, and there it's like almost like there were two whole different stages of his career, and being able to showcase some of that and showing some of these mega, you know, the connection that utilizing the Hagler and Hearns fight from 1985 a few weeks ago made with our audience was immense. Really? You know, between the older fans talking about, man, I remember watching this with my dad, you know, tell me about that. To now, like, current fight fans saying, like, man, can you imagine, you know, fights like this today? And there's a way to bridge those two audiences. There's a way to bridge those two audiences, and we're really kind of finding different ways to do it right now.
Hagler Hearns, one of the fights that resonated with it got me into boxing, got probably you into boxing, it got everybody who is a passionate hardcore fan remembers vividly the first time they saw that fight. Do you think that the recent re-showcasing of that fight through ESPN, through your socials, ignited a passion in a fan?
Oh, totally. You know, you never know how you can parlay something like that, the success of someone seeing the fight, like a fight like that for the first time, to, you know, when boxing returns in the coming months, you know, who's now going to be more inclined to maybe watch some live boxing after getting these tastes of boxing from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. It's going to be really fascinating to see what the sports audience and viewership looks like in the next, you know, 3-4 months.
I'd be very interested in seeing those metrics. Is there anything that you like about the major franchises, the major leagues, that you are planning on implementing at the Top Rank Studios?
Where I really take a lot of inspiration from that is from teams in the four major sports. You know, in football, for example, you know, Los Angeles Chargers, I think, do it better than just about anybody in terms of, you know, connecting with a younger audience and who their audience is and who they want their audience to be. But, you know, they're also permitted to kind of have a different brand voice than, say, the New England Patriots can, or the Dallas Cowboys. And then, you know, when you look in baseball, I'm a huge baseball fan, and I think the Tampa Bay Rays are always really fun on social, and especially it all starts with their voice and how they present themselves.
Shout out to Tampa Bay Rays, Erin Hodges there. She's coming next on the podcast.
The Tampa Bay Rays, though, can have a different voice than maybe the New York Yankees. While, you know, if the New York Yankees mimic that voice, it might not come across as authentic. So that's where we're constantly trying to find our place is, you know, we have some of the biggest stars in the sport today, some of the biggest stars of the sport tomorrow coming up through the ranks right now. I noticed that you're following the Jordan Jamming Twitter page. It's one of my favorites.
What other top 2, top 3, give me your top 3 just Twitter channels to go to, that one is some of your favorite brand voice accounts?
I like humorous stuff on my Twitter feed as opposed to, you know, there's so much noise out there.
Right.
You know, some of the ones that I've loved over the years, like The Last Blockbuster. It's basically tweets from the last Blockbuster account, store in existence.
That's hilarious.
Which is just amazing.
I think, me personally, I love the Wendy's account. I'm not sure if you follow it. If you do, they're epic. They know how to troll the trolls. D brand telling their fans to fuck off, and their shipments, and like they're just really funny in the way that they engage, but they're on top of the shit every time.
And one thing I'll say with that is, it really takes, when you work in social media for a company like that, it really takes top level executive buy-in to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're going to do things that are going to push the envelope and make some people uncomfortable. We have buy-in in the company where we can really, test with some things and play with some things, and everybody kind of understands what it is we're trying to do.